My brother demanded that I apologize for ruining the announcement of his engagement with my pregnancy. But he was exposed as unfaithful at the dinner he planned to confront me. My brother and I have always had a complicated relationship. He is a year older than me. But sometimes it seemed like we came from completely different worlds. From a young age, there was a clear difference in how our parents treated us. He was always my mother's favorite. The one who could do whatever he wanted without facing consequences. While I was the responsible one. The one who had to solve the problems he caused. Despite that, I never imagined that our relationship would reach the point where it is now. It all started when my wife and I found out that we were expecting our first child. It was a moment of pure happiness for us. We had been trying for a while. And after months of uncertainty, things finally worked out. We felt that our dream of starting a family was coming true. With excitement overflowing, we decided to share the news with our families at an informal dinner we organized at home. I remember that there was a special energy that night. My mother was radiant. And my father couldn't stop smiling. When we made the announcement, my mom let out a shout of joy and ran to hug us, while my dad gave a firm handshake and congratulated us. Everything seemed perfect until I looked at my brother. He was sitting in his place with his arms crossed and an expression of total displeasure. It was so evident that even my wife, who always tries to find the best in everyone, noticed. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking that maybe he was having a bad day. But it didn't take long for him to make it clear what he really thought. "Couldn't you wait a little longer to share this?" he blurted out suddenly, breaking the atmosphere of happiness that filled the room. There was an awkward silence. My mom looked at him confused. And my wife and I exchanged glances, not knowing if he was joking or serious. Finally, I dared to ask him, "Wait. What?" "It's great news for us. And we wanted to share it with you." He let out an exaggerated sigh and said, "I'm about to get engaged to my girlfriend. And this ruins everything." The statement left us all in shock. No one knew that he had plans to get engaged. Not even my mother, who is normally aware of every detail of his life. While we were trying to process what we had just heard, my brother continued, "I had planned to announce it tonight. Now, anything I say or do will be overshadowed by your big news. This shows how selfish you are." His words left me frozen for a moment. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. Selfish for sharing the news that we were expecting a child. It didn't make sense. I tried to stay calm and responded with serenity. "I understand you had something planned. But no one knew about it. This isn't a competition. And we weren't trying to steal your thunder." However, he seemed determined to maintain his stance. "It's always the same with you. You have to be the center of attention. This was important to me. And you ruined it." My mother tried to mediate, as she always did when things got tense between us. "Son, we didn't know about your plans. This isn't anyone's fault. You both have wonderful news to share. And you should be happy for your brother." But he wasn't willing to listen. He got up from the table with a dramatic gesture and said, "I can't do this. I'm leaving." And before anyone could stop him, he left the house, leaving his girlfriend visibly uncomfortable in her place. That night ended in an awkward silence. My wife and I felt guilty, even though we knew we hadn't done anything wrong. We tried to apologize to his girlfriend before she left too. But she just told us that it was okay and left after him. I thought things would calm down with time. But it didn't happen. A few days later, my brother called me. And what he said left me completely perplexed. A few days after the awkward dinner, my brother called me. At first, I thought he wanted to apologize for his behavior, or at least try to talk calmly about what had happened. I was completely wrong. Listen. We have to fix this, he said, in a tone that sounded more like an order than a suggestion. I sighed and tried to stay calm. What do you mean by fix this? We didn't do anything wrong. We just shared our happiness. And I feel like you took it very personally. Nothing wrong. His tone immediately rose. You ruined my big moment. The least you could do is try to make up for it. Make up for it? I asked. Although I already suspected that what he was going to say wouldn't make sense. I want you to post an announcement on your social media. Something like, we rushed to share the news of our pregnancy, and didn't realize how important this moment was for my brother and his girlfriend. And then include something about how their engagement is the true celebration of the family. I remained silent for a few seconds, trying to process the absurdity of what he had just said. I thought maybe he was joking. But from the tone of his voice, he was completely serious. You want me to say that our pregnancy was a timing error so that your engagement gets more attention? That doesn't make any sense. I replied, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. It's only fair, he replied. You have months to celebrate your pregnancy. But my engagement is something unique. A single moment. Don't you think my girlfriend deserves that? I explained with all the patience I had left that I wasn't going to do something like that. That my wife's pregnancy was something special for us. And that we weren't going to minimize it to please him. But he didn't want to listen to reason. So you're saying that my relationship doesn't matter, he accused. I knew he always tried to outdo me. But this was a new level of selfishness. After that call, my wife found me sitting on the couch with my hands on my head. She asked me what had happened. And when I told her, her reaction was exactly what I felt at that moment, disbelief and frustration. This isn't just jealousy anymore. He's being manipulative, she said firmly. You can't let him make you feel guilty for something as beautiful as our pregnancy. I knew she was right. But what my brother did next proved that he was willing to take things much further. A couple of days later, I received a call from my mother. She told me that my brother had been crying and saying that I was sabotaging his relationship. According to her, his girlfriend was upset because this whole situation had made her engagement not feel special. My mother was visibly worried. As always, wanting to solve the problem to maintain family peace. Can't you just apologize, she told me. It doesn't matter if you're right or not. Just say something to make him feel better. He's your brother. I explained again that there was nothing to apologize for. That I wasn't going to minimize our pregnancy or pretend that we had done anything wrong. My mother sighed in frustration, but finally said, well, then, I hope you're ready for what he's planning. That phrase put me on alert. What does that mean? What is he planning? He wants the whole family to get together. He says it's to clear things up. But I think he wants everyone to make you feel bad until you apologize, my mother confessed with a tone of resignation. My wife and I discussed whether we should go to that meeting. We knew my brother could be dramatic. But we didn't want to cause more problems with the rest of the family. In the end, we decided to attend, thinking that if things got tense, we would simply leave. What we didn't know was that this meeting wouldn't be a simple confrontation. It would be the moment when everything would come to light. The night of the meeting arrived, and we went to my parents' house. The whole family was there, cousins, aunts, uncles, and even some close friends. It seemed more like a party than an intervention. My brother was acting as if he were the perfect host. But his attitude seemed too exaggerated. Almost theatrical. After a while of informal chat, my brother asked everyone to sit down. He stood up with a glass in his hand and began to speak. I want to thank you all for being here. As you know, my brother and I have had some differences lately. But I'm sure we can resolve them as a family. I looked at my wife confused. This didn't feel like an apology, or an attempt at reconciliation. Something was wrong. What I mean is that sometimes people's actions can be misinterpreted, he continued. And although some of us have made mistakes, there's always an opportunity to make things right. I felt a knot in my stomach. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was building a scenario. Preparing something. What happened next was something none of us expected. While my brother continued his speech, an air of discomfort filled the room. He seemed to enjoy being the center of attention, speaking in a condescending tone, as if he were the victim in a family tragedy. My wife squeezed my hand under the table, clearly uneasy, while I tried to maintain my composure. We all make mistakes, he said finally with an artificial smile that didn't reach his eyes. But the important thing is to recognize them and make sure they don't ruin the most important relationships in our lives. Our family. It was clear that he was trying to put me in the place of the bad guy. But I didn't bother to respond. I knew it wasn't worth falling into his game. However, what happened next completely changed the course of the night. Before he could continue with his show, his girlfriend, who had been sitting silently the whole time, finally intervened. Her voice was low but firm, and everyone in the room fell silent immediately. "Are you really doing this now?" she asked, looking at him with a mixture of frustration and disgust. My brother tried to ignore her. "Honey, this isn't the time to talk about that. We're trying to resolve more important things." "Yes. It is the perfect time," she replied, getting up from her seat. "Because I'm tired of pretending and of protecting you. Everyone here needs to know who you really are." My mother, who until that moment had been observing with concern, tried to intervene. "Dear, please calm down. This isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," she said with a tone that silenced my mother. "Because I'm tired of your manipulations, your lies, and of you turning your family against me to hide your own flaws." My brother's face paled. He tried to interrupt her, but she didn't stop. "You want everyone to think that you're the victim here, that your brother ruined your special moment. Why don't you tell them the truth about what you've been doing behind my back while planning this engagement?" A murmur of confusion filled the room. My brother tried to divert the topic. "This has nothing to do with what we're discussing. It's not the time or the place." She cut him off immediately. "Of course it is. Because you're here pretending to be a martyr when you've been cheating on me for months." "Yes. Cheating on me. While everyone here thought you were the perfect boyfriend. I was discovering text messages, late night calls, and absurd excuses. All with another woman." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother dropped her glass on the floor, and everyone in the room looked at my brother, waiting for a response. "That's not true," he stammered. But his voice trembled, and the lack of conviction in his words only made him feel more guilty. "It's not true," she replied, taking her phone out of her purse. "Do you want me to show the evidence? Because I have it all here." My brother didn't know where to hide. His face went from disbelief to panic and finally to fury. "You have no right to do this in front of my family." "I have no right," she said, on the verge of tears. "And you had the right to lie to me. To use this meeting to make your brother look like the bad guy. And to divert attention from your own lies." At this point, everyone in the room was frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. My wife and I looked at each other, not knowing whether we should stay or run. My father, who until that moment had remained silent, finally spoke. "Is this true?" he asked my brother, with a voice that he only used when he was really angry. My brother tried to deny it, but his girlfriend had already opened her phone and was showing the screenshots of the messages to the people nearby. My mother tried to get up to stop her, but my father stopped her. "Let her. If this is true, We need to know. It was a devastating moment for everyone. As the evidence passed from hand to hand, my brother sank deeper and deeper into his seat. His excuses became less convincing with each word. Finally, his girlfriend said what we were all thinking. I don't know why I stayed with you for so long. Maybe because I really wanted to believe that you were better than you are. But I can't do it anymore. She took off the ring she was wearing. The one that my brother had used to propose to her a few days before. And left it on the table. You can keep this. It doesn't mean anything. And with that, she left the room, leaving a crushing silence behind her. My brother, now exposed and humiliated, tried to salvage what was left of his dignity. This doesn't change anything. What she did was completely inappropriate. But that doesn't justify what you did to me, he said, pointing at me. I laughed. A bitter and tired laugh. You still think this is about me? You organized this meeting thinking you could manipulate everyone to take your side. But in the end, your own lies caught you. I don't need to say anything else. For the first time in my life, I saw my brother without answers. Not because he didn't have words, but because he knew that anything he said would only make the situation worse. The night ended abruptly. My wife and I decided to leave, leaving behind the chaos that my brother had created. But it wasn't the end. The consequences of that night would resonate in our family for a long time. The day after the dinner, my phone didn't stop ringing. Messages, calls, notifications on social media. It was evident that what had happened the night before had left everyone in shock. The family that had always been good at sweeping problems under the rug was now facing a crisis that it couldn't ignore. My mother was the first to call me. Her voice was loaded with tension, mixing a tone of worry and reproach. This got out of control, she said. What happened last night should never have happened. It was a humiliation for your brother. I sat on the sofa and took a deep breath before answering. A humiliation for him. Mom? What happened was his fault. If he hadn't tried to manipulate everyone to divert attention from his problems, none of this would have happened. But you didn't help, she replied. You've always been more direct. And that makes him feel attacked. You should have tried to mediate, not confront him. Her ability to justify anything my brother did always left me perplexed. But this time, I wasn't going to remain silent. I wasn't the one who exposed him in front of everyone. It was his own fiancée. And she did it because she was tired of his lies. If you want to blame someone, look at him. Not me. My mother sighed, but didn't continue the discussion. Instead, she tried to change the subject. Anyway, I think you should call him and talk to him. He's very affected by all this. I'm sorry, Mom, but I don't think talking to him will help now. If he wants to fix things, he has to start by accepting his mistakes. In the following days, the news about my brother's behavior spread like wildfire among the family and our close friends. Although his fiancée had been the one to expose him, many were still trying to understand how someone could be so brazen. Some family members defended him, saying that everyone makes mistakes and that he deserved another chance. Others, especially those closest to his ex-girlfriend, completely took her side. What made everything even more complicated was that my brother didn't seem willing to accept any responsibility. Instead of apologizing, he began to tell his own version of events, in which I was the villain. According to him, I had planned everything from the beginning. He said that my wife and I had announced our pregnancy deliberately to overshadow his engagement, and that we had somehow manipulated his ex-girlfriend to betray him. It was an absurd narrative. But surprisingly, some people believed it. Messages and calls from certain family members began to arrive, demanding explanations. One of my uncles even went so far as to tell me that I was destroying family unity with my arrogance. Of course, not everyone was on his side. My father, who had always been more impartial, called me one day to offer his support. "Don't worry about what others say," he told me. "What happened wasn't your fault. Your brother got himself into this mess. And now he has to face it." Although his words were comforting, the drama didn't seem to end. My wife, who was dealing with the stress of the pregnancy, began to feel overwhelmed by all of this. "It's not fair to us," she told me one night. "We should be enjoying this moment, not dealing with his drama." She was absolutely right. We decided to take a step back and disconnect from the family for a while. I turned off my phone and avoided social media. We focused on preparing for the arrival of the baby, on enjoying our relationship, and on regaining calm. Meanwhile, my brother faced the consequences of his actions. His ex-girlfriend, far from staying silent, decided to tell her version of the story through her own social media. She posted screenshots of the messages she had found and details about the time she had been suspecting him. Although some considered it unnecessary, most people supported her. The posts went viral within our social circle, and my brother soon became the topic of conversation at all family gatherings and among friends. Even some people who had defended him at the beginning began to distance themselves from him. My mother was devastated. She tried to minimize the damage by talking to family members one by one. But it was a futile effort. The truth was already out, and there was no way to reverse it. One day, my brother called me. It was the first time he had tried to talk to me since the dinner. At first, I thought maybe he wanted to apologize, or at least try to fix things. But his tone made it clear that he hadn't changed. "I hope you're happy," he began. "Your little show managed to ruin me. Now no one takes me seriously. And it's all because of your damn need to be the center of attention." I laughed in disbelief. "You still think this was my fault? You caused all of this with your lies and your actions. I have nothing to do with your problems." "I don't care what you think," he responded coldly. "But I assure you, this isn't over. I'm not going to let you destroy my life without consequences." I hung up the call without saying more. I knew that any attempt to reason with him would be futile. As the weeks went by, the drama began to fade. At least in our lives. My wife and I moved away from family tensions and focused on our relationship and the health of the baby. But it was clear that the damage in the family was irreparable. My brother had lost not only his fiancée, but also the trust and respect of many close people. Although my mother continued to try to defend him, even she seemed tired of his constant excuses. It wasn't the end I would have wished for our relationship. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was protecting my wife and our future child from the chaos that my brother continued to generate. Time went by, and while my wife and I distanced ourselves from most of the family, his attempts to manipulate others into blaming me became increasingly pathetic. And many people began to see him as he really was. Someone who preferred to destroy others rather than face his own mistakes. For our part, we decided that the best thing was to stay away from any conflict. Still, my mother didn't stop trying to reconcile us. During a visit to drop off some gifts for the baby, she insisted that the family must stay together, and that resentment leads nowhere. I knew that from her perspective. She wanted the best for everyone. But she simply couldn't understand the damage that my brother had caused. "Mom," I told her as I helped my wife arrange the gifts, "this isn't a matter of resentment. He has never accepted what he did. Nor has he shown any intention of changing. I can't expose my family to any more of his toxicity." She sighed, clearly frustrated. He's going through a bad time. The breakup with his fiancée was devastating for him. And he's looking for ways to rebuild his life. I didn't want to be cruel. But I knew I had to make things clear. If he really wants to rebuild his life, he has to start by acknowledging his mistakes. Until then, there's nothing we can do. A few weeks later, our baby was born. It was a moment full of happiness that helped us leave behind all the stress of the previous months. My wife and I felt more united than ever. And the support of our close friends and family was overwhelming. My father, who had maintained his distance from all the drama, was one of the first to visit us at the hospital. His pride and joy were evident. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that the family could find some balance, even if it was partial. However, my brother did not appear. He didn't send a message, a gift, or even a simple congratulations. I wasn't surprised. But something inside me still hoped that maybe, with the arrival of the baby, he could find a reason to change. One day, while we were strolling with the stroller in the park, I received an unexpected message. It was from my brother. His tone, although dry, seemed different. He said something like, "I know things have been tense. I'd like to talk to you if you're willing. I want to fix things." My wife, noticing my reaction, asked what was going on. When I told her, her expression was a mixture of skepticism and hope. "What do you think he wants?" "Honestly, I don't know," I responded. "But maybe it's time to listen." I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my house. When he arrived, his appearance reflected the weight of the last few months. He looked tired, like someone who had finally faced the consequences of his decisions. "Thanks for coming," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I'm not here to argue," I responded. "If you have something to say, I'm all ears." He took a few moments to gather his thoughts before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I handled things. And I want to say that I'm sorry." That word, sorry, was something I never thought I would hear from him. Although his apology wasn't perfect or profound, it was a beginning. "I know I put you in a horrible position. I didn't handle things well. And although I can't change what happened, I want to try to be a better brother." I didn't know how to respond immediately. I had spent so much time defending my family from his behavior that letting my guard down seemed risky. But I also knew that this was a rare moment, an opportunity that might not come again. "I appreciate you saying that," I responded finally. "But you know it's not just about apologizing to me. You've hurt a lot of people. And if you really want to change, you have to show it with actions, not just words." He nodded, albeit with some uncertainty. "I know. I just hope you give me a chance to try." The road to reconciliation wasn't easy or fast. My brother had a long history of toxic behaviors that wouldn't disappear overnight. But over time, he began to show small changes. He attended therapy, something he would never have considered before, and slowly began to rebuild relationships with other family members. Although there were still moments of tension, our relationship improved enough for him to meet his nephew. It was an emotional moment for everyone. And although he still had a lot to do to earn our trust, it was clear that he was making a genuine effort. As we moved forward into the future, I learned to let go of some of the pain that he had caused. My priority continued to be my wife and our son. But there was room to consider the possibility of a new beginning with my brother.